Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Tpull's Corner. This is Travis, and we're doing something a little unusual tonight because rotation is upon us, and we're going to lose 4 sets. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to go through the sets one by one, and I'll just do this in 4 quick little videos, but I wanted to cover the cards that I'm going to miss the most out of each set. So we start with the first one, Innistrad Midnight Sun, and I'll do 4 different videos, one for each set, one for each expansion set. And there are a couple of cards in here that are like rare, mythic rare, that I never even got. So one of these is going to be a card that I never played with. But first one I'm going to miss is Fateful Absence. I really did appreciate the ability to get rid of Planeswalkers for such a cheap amount. And I was willing to pay that cost, right? Wizards of the Coast designs these cards this way on purpose with white a lot of times, where if it has to get rid of an attacker or a threat, it will, but there's some sort of consequence. There has to be a little give and take when white's involved. Some sense of the color philosophy involving balance, right? So here it does let you get rid of something that may be a big threat to you, but it does allow them to have a chance to replace it by drawing a card. Needless to say, I use this a lot for my removal, and I'm definitely going to miss it. I'm not sure what's going to replace it, actually. The other thing that white is good at is board wipes. And this was a fun one for me, Vanquish the Horde. There was so many matches where the enemy went wide and gave me just enough ammunition that this would get down to just costing 2, 3, 4 mana, and I could destroy every creature on the board. You can see I only have 2 copies of the card, but I used it a lot, and I'm going to miss it for sure. So those are the white colors. Those are the white cards that I'm going to miss the most. Moving over to blue, I'm going to do a dozen cards. Triskaidekaphile. I lost track of how many decks this card went into. Sometimes just because you have no maximum hand size. There is an alternate win condition at the beginning of your upkeep. If you have exactly 13 cards in your hand, you win the game. And as Wizards does with most of the cards like this, where there's some sort of condition that's an advantage, they include the ability to sort of fulfill that prophecy within the card. So for 4 mana, you could actually have yourself draw a card any one time you could afford it. So maybe at the end of a turn you have 12 cards in your hand, right? Maybe you keep 4 open to draw for that 13th to get the win. So it's I lost track of how many times I won the alternate way, and I actually stayed away from the card a little bit because I was afraid of putting out videos with too many instances of this when it first came out. But this is probably hands down my favorite blue card that I was tempted to put in a whole bunch of different decks. So out of all the blue cards, I think I'm going to miss this one the most. I'll give an honorable mention to Devious Cover-Up, but that's a reprint. The next card that I thought really impressed me in blue was Lier, Disciple of the Drowned. And again, I only had 2. I didn't use it a whole lot, but I really had fun when I did. Spells can't be countered, plus instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard have flashback. This card had a sort of moment in the sun before they changed certain things about the rules. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about this card. I mean, if you were around for it, it's still used sometimes in some decks, but its popularity has waned with all the sets that have gone through. But I'd say for legendary creatures, this is one of the big ones for me. Let's move over to black. And let's see, what am I looking for? I'm looking for a card that I just crafted a wild card just to say I have it because I never had it. I was looking forward to this. I like the curses. The curses are a cycle. There's one in each color for this set for Innistrad Midnight Hunt. And this is the one I never had, but I was actually looking forward to getting like 4 copies and doing a build around. There's life happened and I wasn't able to make quite as many videos as I wanted to back in the day. But yeah, this is kind of nice. You enchant the player itself. At the beginning of enchant player's upkeep, they lose 1 life and you gain 1 life. And then if it changes to night through the normal mechanic of daybound, nightbound, it turns into a 4/4 creature with lifelink. So I really like the design of this card, and I just never got around to it. It's one of those things on my bucket list, so to speak. I might make a deck with this and build around it in Historic sometime just to do it. But yeah, it's you sort of wake up one day and you look and it's like, oh, I never did get that card as a reward and I never got it in a pack opening. So it's kind of strange, but I came across it on the field of battle often enough. It was a very popular card at the time, and I always appreciated it. I always liked the design. I always thought the threat was pretty cool. Always thought if you could stack multiple copies of this, that would be really cool, especially if you combine it with some other of the curse cards. So yeah, there's my favorite card that I never got to play with, actually. The next card that I'm going to miss is actually Morbid Opportunist. I tended to have winning black decks whenever I stacked the deck with this. The meta environment has almost always had this idea that it's going to be heavy with removal. And if you got the Morbid Opportunist out, usually there was some other card that was a bigger threat, like you had it paired with Sheoldred or something, and they'd have to kill Sheoldred. But that gave you draw card advantage. And sometimes I get 2 or 3 of these out in a single deck, and oh man, you would just run away with the card draw. And there are some players that spotted this, and they would make the Morbid Opportunist their first hit. As soon as it reared its head, they would kill it. And that's when you knew somebody understood what real value there was to this card. It's the gaming community is split for those that play Magic between those that recognize the true value of this card and those that don't. And you have a much harder time if somebody understands exactly how big a threat this card really represents. So I'm going to miss that. For red, there's probably an honored mention to Ardent Elementalist. I created a nice little recursive infinite board wipe and return from the graveyard type of combo with this one that I really enjoyed and had a good thing. But the card that I used the most, again, even though I only ever had 2 copies of it, Burn Down the House. Almost every single time that I was including red in a color, I would, by default, turn to Burn Down the House. This was a key utility card. I love the 2 different options. It's great in almost any setting that you could imagine. Its versatility is just so awesome. You could do it with token decks. You could do it with just if you wanted a board wipe and you hated the idea of using it for tokens. But just the inherent flexibility with being able to choose one or the other, especially if you combine this with some Arcane Bombardment decks. Oh, killer. Yeah, I am genuinely going to miss Burn Down the House. Let's move on to green. And Outland Liberator is not bad, but there's a card I'm going to miss more. Let's see if I can find it. There. Augur of Autumn. I'm a sucker for cards that say you can look at the top card of your library anytime, but with the Coven ability, you get 3 or more creatures with different powers. You can actually cast creatures from the top of your library. You could always play lands from the top of your library. Since I have a history of arena land starving me more than the average bear, whenever I put in green, there was usually at least 1 copy of Augur of Autumn in my deck. Really made a big difference in hitting your land drops. And sometimes I would build a deck sort of around this card specifically so that I could plan on ways to get creatures out that I could have different powers and protect them long enough that suddenly it's just like you had a 52 card deck and you could almost play anything you wanted off the top of your deck. Lands, creatures, didn't matter. You played the land, you got more land, you can afford to cast more creatures. So this card, genuinely going to miss this card. Let's move on from green into the gold cards, the multicolor cards. And it's strange how many favorite cards I have that I never burned wild cards to get 4 copies of, but Liesa, Forgotten Archangel. This is a potential game ender, right? 4/5 with flying and lifelink is not a bad card in and of itself, but whenever another non-token creature control dies, return that card to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. If a creature an opponent controls would die, you exile it instead. So that ability is kind of an end writer, so to speak. This idea, I mean, Kazako, the Kazako enchantment also, or is it Kakazo? I always mispronounce that one star red enchantment. But it also exiles creatures if an opponent controls them and they would die. But that was kind of a feature of Innistrad, I think. And just a minor theme if you pay attention throughout the set. And it actually helped me win a couple of games, just the fact that they were losing creatures that they couldn't bring back. But the biggest, most obvious advantage is that it didn't matter. If they did a board wipe, all those other creatures could go back up into your hand and you could cast them again. So I enjoyed this card. I always had an eye out for using it whenever I was playing Orzhov Colors. So yeah, like it a lot, gonna miss it. A card that I did have 4 copies of and used a lot, probably almost as often as I use Burn Down the House. Siphon Insight. although it can be irritating when your opponent take your cards, I love it when I get to do it to my opponent. Look at the top 2 cards of target opponent's library. You get to exile one of them face down, the other on the bottom of the library. Half the time I'm just using this to make my land drop because I didn't draw a land. So I go to my opponent and I say, okay, give me your land, because I still need more land in these early stages to do what I need to do. Other times you would just catch a really good Jewel of theirs and use it against them. Use that to actually win the match. It's awesome. Had flashback so you could use it twice. Relatively cheap flashback cost though, so I thought it was a very high value card. I would make theme decks on this every now and then based on the idea of raiding your opponent's library, that type of stuff. Sometimes they'd be part of a mill strategy too. So a couple of different ways you could use this. Out of all of the cards, I'm trying to think of which one I would miss the most. Just in terms of how often I use this, I would probably have to say Siphon Insight is number 1 or number 2 card I will miss the most out of the Midnight Hunt expansion. The other double color card, let's see, where are you? There you are. Angelfire Ignition. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. It gains all these different traits. These are all evergreen terms. Vigilance, Trample, Lifelink, Indestructible, and Haste, and you can flash it back. Not only did I design decks specifically around this card, but if I'm ever playing red and white, odds are I'm going to throw at least one of those in there. This is, I just really enjoy everything about this card. And although it is a sorcery, it wasn't an instant. I use this card a lot. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I don't know that there's much that can replace it right now in the current environment. So yeah, another little favorite of mine. And I'm wondering, go ahead and leave a comment if one of those happen to be your favorite. We're going to move into the artifacts, and one mainstay that I used almost without thinking of it. Honorable mention to Field of Ruin, right? We're going to lose Field of Ruin, but there are other cards that already duplicate that for the most part. And I mean, I like the design on this. I like the artwork on this. Really cool card. But we're kind of not losing it, so to speak. There's going to be plenty of substitutes. Is there really a substitute for the Celestus? This card I wasn't sure about when it first came out, but I would put this into my decks without even thinking about it. It was basically my land number 25 or 26 if I needed it. Gives you mana for any color, so if I'm doing a 5-card deck, it's pretty much going in my 5-card deck, 5-color deck, I should say. And in the fact that you could trigger it, trigger the day-night, trigger the card draw, it was also frustrating sometimes because there would be times when I would drill through my deck and I would get rid of a blood token or something and get rid of a card, and it would be a land card. I would trigger the Celestus for 3 and throw away my land card, and I draw a land card. I lost track of how many times I was flooding out, and I would still lose a match because I would go through 4 or 5 lands in a row, and I could just not get to a spell to save my life. And it was that moment in the game, in the middle of the game, that I needed something because my opponent was, you know, I had a positive board state usually, and my opponent would draw a good spell, and I'm like, oh, I need to counter that, I need to address that, and I get the land. You know, next turn, pulse it again, get another land. I just couldn't make up the ground. So it could be intensely frustrating sometimes just with the way Arena treated me with the random generation of cards that draw off my deck. But there were also times when I would draw exactly what I needed, only because I had the Celestus and the ability to dig through my deck that I didn't have built in somewhere else in the deck. So yeah, I'm not sure if I would say this is one of my favorites per se, but it grew on me to the point that it became such a utility card. I think I have to include it as one of my favorites now because I got to come up with a good substitute for this because it's going away and I'm going to miss it. So that's it. The dozen cards from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. This has been Travis from Tpull's Corner. We thank you all for joining us just for this quick rundown. I'm not going to belabor the point or have a larger video on these. These are going to be short, just running through the list of all my favorite cards. I'll do the other 3 expansion sets. I'll throw them out there as quick as I can. And after that, we'll get back to our regularly scheduled programming. But rotation is upon us. And I haven't done this before, really, where I go through and talk about the cards that I like the most. But I will go ahead and list them in the text below. Go ahead and let me know if this makes, if you're making a top 10, top 12 list, how many of these are on your list? Or is there something that you really enjoyed out of the set that it's really hurting you that this is leaving? Let me know. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.